So my name's Nat, as all of you probably know by now, and I do the Thursday webinars at Exceptional Individuals. We do them on every subject you could possibly imagine, but today we are doing it on dyslexia discrimination, looking at real case examples of where people have taken acts of discrimination to tribunal and to see, and let's see kind of what happens. Because you know what? We often get people at EI say, you know what, I've been discriminated against. It's sad, but not uncommon. But they always say, is this something I should push forward a bit further? And it's a really difficult question to answer. It should be noted, I'm not a lawyer. I don't have any legal background, but I do support people on a daily basis who do feel or definitely have been discriminated in one shape or form. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting one today, and maybe not the easiest, but I'm sure you all can handle it. So today we're focusing on dyslexia, but in fairness, most of these could be applied to any neurodivergence or any disability for that matter. We support a whole heap of people, mostly neurodivergent. Our lovely team is predominantly neurodiverse. Bear in mind, I do need to update this photo dramatically because we've got lots of new people now. And our team is always growing. And as always, April is here recording our webinar. And each week we record them and edit them and get them uploaded to YouTube so you never have to miss one. Because there might be a particular subject you're interested in. Last week we did autism and sex. Originally, we went out looking for the difference in biological sex, with different chromosomes. But during the research, we found out actually the biggest difference comes down to gender, how society views you, which is really interesting. So definitely worth a watch. We didn't get out of it what we expected to, but in many ways that makes it more exciting. Now, I like to do quick definitions just to make sure everyone's on the same page. We're talking about dyslexia today. Most people think they know what dyslexia is, but do they really? So dyslexia is a developmental learning disorder with impairments in reading characterized by significant and persistent difficulties in learning. That's the more official way of talking about it. But really, dyslexia is how your brain interprets written language, and it can be how you pronunciate words, how you read. It can impact your attention. I normally use this little moving image to kind of demonstrate what it can be like to have dyslexia. Obviously, it's not completely accurate by any means, but it shows you that people with dyslexia can read, they can learn, but it might take them slightly longer to decode and to work out the meaning. So we're not looking at people who are incapable of working today. We're looking at people whose brains have a preference in how they learn, so reasonable adjustments could significantly benefit them. So quick question to all of you. How many people are dyslexic? If we're looking at the population, are we looking at 20% of the population, 7% of the population, 3% of the population? Now, these might be stats that are a bit different to use because it depends where you get your information from. But I thought this one was particularly interesting today. Okay. The correct answer is, in fact, all of them. Now, you might be wondering, how can it be all of them? Well, if we look at people with mild signs of dyslexia to even a very, rudimental, basic kind of understanding of what dyslexia is, about 20% of the population is dyslexic. That's a big chunk. And these are predominantly the ones, in the workforce, people you might encounter on a day-to-day. But then if you're looking at people who have more severe dyslexia, you're looking at about 7%, and then 3% for those who have real extreme dyslexia. So the one that's 20% might be those who struggle with reading, take a little bit longer to process. The 7% a bit less difficult, but no, more difficult, still very persistent. And those in the 3% of the population really struggle. They might struggle to read or write. So either way, however you cut it, there are a lot of people who have dyslexia. Now, here's a quick one as well. Are certain groups more likely to be dyslexic? So we know there are a lot of people with dyslexia, but if you're biologically male or biologically female, is one or the other more likely? And this will also be useful because typically when you're looking at discrimination, you're looking at how people have been treated before and what the judge or courts have ruled. Now, most people tend to be male. Is this because men are more likely to be dyslexic? No, but the way that we look at dyslexia, the way we understand it, is from a male point of view. We've done webinars on this before where we've spoke about the gender differences and the sex differences, so definitely check them out if you are interested. Can you stop being dyslexia? So essentially, is there a cure? Can you grow out of it? Any of those? No, sometimes yes. Okay, we've got most of you have said no, some of you have said sometimes. And that's interesting because the short answer is no, you can't stop being dyslexic, but you can learn to, find coping strategies and little mechanisms in place that can make life easier. You could have assistive technology like speech to voice technology, or like things that can help read things back to you, or advanced spelling software, which do not get rid of the dyslexia, but can kind of like ease its negative effects on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, great stuff. And this is important to know because when we're looking at disabilities, we're looking at things which you can't help, that are something, not all disabilities are lifelong, but dyslexia is. And that is, again, important to know when we're looking at whether or not we are being treated fairly. So another one, quick true or false. This is when we get a little bit more legal. Is dyslexia officially a disability? Yes or no? Is dyslexia covered under the Equality Act 2010? Now, this is from a UK perspective, but even if you're not in the UK, you'll normally have some sort of Equality Act. Does it count? And lastly, dyslexia is automatically protected against disability discrimination. Yes or no? Okay, yes, we've got yes, 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 yes. Okay. Now let's have a look what these answers are, okay? Because it might not be what you always assume. So is dyslexia a disability? Yes. And we're not talking about how you personally feel or in like a society, in a I personally resonate that I don't consider it a disability. We're talking from a legal point of view. It is a disability. And that's a good thing because you can't discriminate against an official disability. Well, you can, but it's against the law. So that's going to be really useful going forward. Then, is dyslexia covered under the Equality Act 2010? Yes. It's a little bit more grayer, to be fair. So dyslexia would come under the definition of being a disability. It doesn't particularly mention dyslexia as something which is covered. However, when you look at previous case examples and how they have turned out, dyslexia has often been covered. So short answer, yes. Longer answer, and the last one, dyslexia is automatically protected against disability discrimination. No. And that's basically what I just said. It's not automatically covered. 9 times out of 10, it will be, but it's done more in a case-by-case situation. Because you know how we broke it down on the percentages, like 20% have dyslexia. That's a lot of things, but it might affect people really mildly. So you might not have the same protections. But if it affects you more severe on a day-to-day basis, then yeah, you could. Christopher says you need an impact statement. Yeah, I mean, if you've got any experiences, keep those comments coming. I'd love to know people's personal views and opinions. Okay, quick thing on the Equality Act. The Equality Act is essentially a great piece of legislation that says if you have some protected characteristics, it is against the law to discriminate against someone and you would have a right to put a claim against them. Now, the Equality Act isn't just about disability. It's also about age, disability, gender reassignment, race, religion, sex, gender, sexual orientation, pregnancy and maternity, or marriage and civil partnerships. So it could be that someone thought you were too old for the job, or maybe too young. Maybe someone thought, oh, you couldn't do that job, you're too disabled. Maybe they didn't like your religion. Now, all these things do count. So we've got someone has put race. Now, I'm sorry that you experienced that, but it's important that we talk about it openly. It might be that you've unfortunately experienced multiple. Yeah, we've got age, neurodiversity, race, sex. Oh, I'm honestly sorry to hear that. I wish I could say it wasn't common, but it's incredibly common. Now, disability, obviously most of us are technically disabled, but because we have a hidden disability, does it make it harder to be protected? Yeah, it does. And we are going to be looking at why there aren't that many examples of when these things have gone a little bit further down the court processes. And do you even need proof? So thanks all for sharing. We've also got being dyslexic. I am taking a previous employer to tribunal. Well, it is absolutely great to have you today because your insights will be really useful. So employee discrimination. Have you ever felt discriminated? So the first one is during recruitment. Do you feel you've ever been discriminated against during recruitment? Maybe you've told them you were dyslexic and they said, oh, I don't know about that. Or you wanted a promotion, but they felt that you weren't able to get that promotion, or you wouldn't be the best candidate because of how your brain works. Maybe you wanted access to training and they thought, well, we're probably going to ease off the training for this particular person, or we're not going to give them the training that would allow them to do their job to the best of their ability. On the last one, do you think that you've ever been bullied for being dyslexic? Has anyone made any little jokes like, oh, that person can't read, or well, I know you're dyslexic, I bet the words are moving around, or whatever? So we've got very quietly the unspoken. Yeah, a lot of the time these things are done very passively. So we've got some people saying they have considered going with their previous employer to tribunal. And yeah, it takes a long time. So I think it's worth mentioning, my goal today isn't to encourage you all to take this to court. I just think you should understand your rights, and, you know, knowledge is power. But as it's been said in the chat, this isn't a walk in the park. It doesn't mean that you should think you can't do it because there is support available, but just know what you might embark on. And I hope that some employers may even watch this, because this isn't us against them. It's about working together. Or we got ACAS are quite good. ACAS. Thank you for that comment. That's really useful. So a quick definition before we move on to the next part: reasonable adjustments. Reasonable adjustments are changes to working conditions. Now, this could be equipment, it could be your duties, it could be your working hours, it could be a number of things. Now, it's called reasonable because they're not meant to make a big difference to the organization, just a small little change that can result in a big, big difference, fingers crossed. They should enable you to do your job should you have medical or additional needs. And we often talk about equality, you know, what does it mean to be truly equal? And this image, you may have seen it before, but I think it demonstrates it quite well. So some people think equality is being equal, everyone having the exact same thing. So everyone being getting a box to stand on to see the game. But if you're taller, you know, it's not equal because we're not all built the same. We're not all this, you know, we are all built differently. So real equality is understanding each individual's personal needs and adapting accordingly. So this is why, you know, you say, oh, you've got a computer, you know, well, I'm dyslexic, so I need something else that will allow me to have a level playing field. We've got in the comments, we've got my team members typically ignore me by my difficulties because I'm the person who can do the job well. That's true, actually. Sometimes you're good at your job, so people assume you don't need any support. That also is discrimination. We've also got, in England, access to work via DWP. Yes, we are going to talk a bit about that soon. They aren't mandated to do access to work, but they are mandated to make a reasonable adjustment, which access to work would cover. And personally, I think they'd be fools not to utilize it. Equality and diversity is fairness. Thank you all for your comments. So here is the first example of an employment case. And this is a picture of Hal from Space Odyssey, if you've never seen it. So Miss P, and these are real cases by the way, Miss P requested a voice recognition software. So this is when you talk to your computer and it writes it out. Not because you can't write, but it allows you to be a lot faster and it takes a lot of the strain off your work, particularly if you have dyslexia. But her employer took 2 years to install it. They may have not thought that was a big deal, but 2 years of struggling, of getting stressed, of the anxiety, it wears down on you. 2 years is not on. And as a result, when she went to court, her organization was found to be in breach and she was awarded £45,000. That's a lot of money. Now, had the employer just helped her in the first place, they would have saved that money. They would have made more money through her productivity. It would have reduced stress. The company wouldn't have had negative publicity. This wasn't good for anyone involved. It isn't about the money. Like, hopefully I don't need to tell any of you. If you're looking for a get-rich-quick scheme, taking people to court isn't going to do it. People typically do not go to court for the money because it's not worth it in the long run. But they go there for justice and fairness, because if this employer could do this to Miss P, they could do it to someone else, and they probably will. But I'd be pretty shocked if they'd made the same mistake twice, because 45 grand here and there definitely adds up, even for a big company. So a quick question to all of you. What do you think an employer's duty to reasonable adjustment should be? So what do I mean by this is, how much work should an employer have to do? Not what they could do. Like, is there do you think the bare minimum for it to be considered fair? Because if you said to an employer, you need to buy me a state-of-the-art computer, need to smash that wall, give me my own office, maybe you'd struggle to have that be called reasonable. But the word reasonable is so grey, it doesn't really define much. So I'd love to know your thoughts. So we got ask what you need, get an assessor to look at the work. Yeah, get an assessor could be good because at least it's fairer then, it's not biased. When it's done internally, you do think there are other factors that are being considered, like cost to the organization. We've got reasonable. So based on the effect, it shouldn't stretch them financially or time-wise. Yeah, that's good because, it's not, like I said before, it's not us against them. No one wants to put the company at a financial disadvantage, which then impacts everyone. This isn't about squeezing the company. It's about making sure people have the tools they need to succeed and to do their job effectively. We've got respectful talk to employers to understand their specific struggles. Absolutely be respectful. So all these things are really great comments. We've also got limit or eliminate the difficulties the person experiences. Yes, from a professional assessment. Yeah, exactly. You can't get rid of dyslexia, we've already imagined. And to be honest, there's a lot of benefits that come with it. But it has to be acknowledged that the workplace wasn't created for neurodiverse people in mind. It was created for neurotypical people. You want the talents that this innovator can bring, at least be willing to support us by putting steps in place so we can access the workforce effectively. We've also got the Equality Act code of practice is very good to support staff and employers. Great. It's always so very interesting to look at other countries, because in the UK, yes, it may not be perfect, but we are very fortunate with what we do have compared to a lot of other countries. Now, how I mentioned how people have different severities of dyslexia? Things like autism and ADHD, it's a bit more clear cut because how they're defined as clinical disabilities or clinical diagnosis. But with dyslexia and dyspraxia, for example, it's not always the case. So what do you do if your dyslexia isn't severe enough? And as an employer, how are you meant to know? You know, when you get your dyslexia kind of assessment, if you have an assessment, it doesn't give you like a rank out of 10. You know, dyslexia is dyslexia. But would it be fair to give someone like thousands of pounds worth of software for someone who has very mild struggles or someone who has very severe struggles? I'm not going to give you an answer to that, but it's definitely worth thinking about, particularly how we know that potentially 20% of the workforce could have dyslexia. That potentially could be a big expense to a company. But obviously not everyone would necessarily need it. So let's have a little look. So first of all, employers should offer support if required. Forget about it. It doesn't matter. It's not your choice to decide whether or not someone is disabled enough for support. Give them support regardless. Again, no one does these things to get rich. They do it because they need it for support, okay? These benefits the organization, not the employee. We've also got failure is a breach of trust and confidence. So if you do not make these adjustments to someone, you are sacrificing more than just money, your reputation, the confidence in your team, the reputation, the morale, the culture, all these things take a massive hit in the gut. So you really want to kind of protect that with all that you've got, because any of us who work knows that once the culture goes downhill, good luck getting it back again. Culture's difficult to build, easy to lose. We've got constructive dismissal may be claimed. So even if someone isn't officially diagnosed with dyslexia and you think that they probably don't need the help, you know, they can manage, that could count as constructive dismissal. So yes, you might not be hit by one particular policy under the Equality Act, but there will be another one that will get you. There's multiple ways of proving that you have been treated unfairly. So it's always worth looking at which one you think applies most to you, which ones have previous examples. We've got, you need to tell your employer what you need. An employer has a defense if they can say we didn't know. That is true. That is true, that you need to tell your employer that you need support. There is always a loophole with that, because if it is perceived relatively obvious, the employer has to. So let's say you're in a wheelchair, you do not tell your employer you're disabled. Well, that is on the employer. They still have to do something. But for things that are more visible, like dyslexia, they can kind of like rebound that with, well, we genuinely didn't know. So make it clear, ideally in writing. And the last one, the employer could be in breach of health and safety. So this is another one. Remember, we've got the Equality Act, we've got constructive dismissal, and we've got in breach of health and safety. If by not doing the reasonable adjustments, are they putting you at risk? It could be mental health ways. It could be like stress, you know, whatever way it's negatively impacting you could also be in breach. So there's many reasons why an employer should take this seriously. And again, my idea isn't for you to go off and take your employer to court. Like, obviously no one wants that, but it's important for them to know what their responsibilities are and for you to know what your rights are. So here's a case that it's more of a story, okay? And it's a real life one. It's from the person called Bulloss, or James, I think, and the charity shelter that supports young homeless people. And this will take you through a bit of a story on the process and how it got to where it got to and what the outcome was. So James worked as an advisor for a charity. So the charity was Shelter. He was relatively junior, but he enjoyed his work. He advised service users, so essentially young homeless people, over the phone, but later started advising via a web chat on a trial period of 4 weeks. So his contract was essentially to be an advisor. Now, the contract actually did state that it could be on both phone or web chat, which is, you know, chatting online. So it was kind of either or. Now, he did during this time, more and more people using the web chat. It wasn't that widespread to begin with. and he started doing it for 4 weeks. So you got a bit of time to see, how are people adopting, how is it going? But 4 weeks is still quite a short period to really, essentially for probation. I would love to know for most of you, most probations are about like 3 months, aren't they? So 4 weeks is a very short time to see how someone is getting along. So James received negative feedback from the team leader due to grammatical and spelling errors. So he has dyslexia, right? Currently it's undiagnosed. And naturally he's going to make mistakes on spelling and errors. Now, from the team leader's perspective, this can't be on. You're representing the company and your spelling needs to be to a certain level. So I'm not trying to make this seem clear cut, because with most cases, there's right and wrong on both sides. Does the manager have a point as well? Yeah, he does, or they do, but so does the individual. So we know that James is making errors since he's transitioned from the phones, which is very vocal, to when he went to the web chat, which is very type-based. If you were the manager, what would you do? I think most people would say, well, we'll just move him back over to the phones. But you've got to ask yourself why you made that decision. Was it because you weren't willing to make any adjustments? Was there discrimination in place? Any bias? These are all really important questions. Before I move on, we got a quick comment which says, I was so stressed in my last role. Project functions very differently with my business as usual in the companies I have worked in. The adjustments would have been fine if business as usual, but not this project because of the stress that follows. It's true. And it's normally the stress, which is the thing that really gets you. It's not the dyslexia that is the stress. It's the stress of being stressed. So in this situation, you can imagine it could be quite traumatic to James, because he was told, you need to change your ways. And you can't change dyslexia, as we've already learned about. Dyslexia is something which is for life. So James told his manager that learning web chat has left him feeling a little run down. He suspected he has dyslexia. So he's being quite, he's not being dramatic at this point. He's being quite reasonable, saying, you know what, this is making me depressed. I'm struggling because I'm putting everything I have into this and I'm not getting anywhere. I'm not currently diagnosed, but I highly suspect I have dyslexia. So at this point, who's in the right? James hasn't said he's got dyslexia. He's only just now alluded to the fact. But now, as we rightly read in the comments, you've got to make it known. So he has at this point stated now that he thinks he has dyslexia. So it is now up to the employer to make an adjustment that is reasonable. So one that isn't going to affect the company in a negative light. So let's see what happens. He did not want to return to doing the phones because he preferred the hours of the web chat service. So this is again interesting. You would automatically assume that James would want to go back to the phones where he felt more comfortable. But you can't make that assumption, because if you ask James, he would say, actually, I don't want to do the phones. The hours were terrible. I wasn't getting much sleep. My personal life was being affected. I much prefer the sociable hours on the web chat. So this puts the employer in a bit of a situation. Well, I appreciate you want to work on the web chat, but you're not very good at it. But you don't want to do the telephones, but I know you can do that role. So in this situation, again, what are you meant to do? Weeks later in a review, James said he now felt more comfortable advising the web chat. So James, he made it clear that he was struggling with it, but it was his preference, but he had 4 weeks to show. So he continued, and he felt that he was getting better at it. Let's face it, with dyslexia, you can't fix it, but you can kind of find coping strategies. But these aren't things that happen overnight. They take time. So James wasn't amazing still, but he had made leaps and bounds and has showed willingness to improve. If he, however, said, you know what, I'm not even going to try, we'd be talking about something different, but he actively wanted to do something different. Then the team leader felt that the quality of writing wasn't still good enough, yet his feedback scores were good. So this was the manager making an executive decision saying, yeah, I know you've been trying really hard, but I personally haven't seen any improvements. But this was kind of like a very objective point of view, because that was, what are you backing this up with? Because when you look at the feedback score, which was their kind of way of monitoring systems, very quantifiable, very black and white, and he had no negative feedback whatsoever, even had quite good feedback, people saying, oh, thank you, we've enjoyed your support, you've really helped us. So his feedback didn't match what his team leader was saying. James was then given a week to improve. 1 week. So after the initial trial period, the manager went, 1 week, step it up. Yet James wasn't able to step up because he was on leave because of fatigue. So fatigue is when you're tired and stressed and run down. So this intense pressure to improve was put on James. And yet when he went off leave because of this stress, the clock kept ticking, tick, tick, tick. As you can imagine, that's just going to make you more and more stressed. So as you can see, the team leader here is really putting James in a very, very difficult position, into a point where he's so stressed and run down, and everything that the team leader is doing is only making matters worse. It's not looking good so far. After he was told that he had failed the trial period and needed to return to the phones, so James just gets back from leave, all right? He's had a few days to recenter himself, calm it down, go with the right mind. And by the mind, he always had a good mindset. He always wanted to improve. He goes back and he says, yeah, you didn't see any improvements, though he's been off. So he has to go back to the phones now. And he didn't want to go back to the phones because of the hours. So his stress level is mounting higher and higher and higher. James then gets sick again with anxiety. And while he is off on sick leave, so he's back on the phones now, but he has since been sick. So not bringing any money into the company or supporting any people because he's too unwell to do so, he goes and get a diagnosis for dyslexia. And he gets given it, it turns out that he is dyslexic. He thought he was, and he is, but he had to do this on his own time with his own money. And after that point, he requested adjustment. So, okay, I've been to an assessor now. I have found out that I do have dyslexia. Please, can I go back to the web chat with adjustments? Which, as we've learned from the Equality Act, is part of the law. You have to make adjustments if someone has a protected characteristic, which dyslexia does count as a disability. So you can see how this is linking in now. Poor James had trouble from the beginning, but no one helped him, and he had to go on this massive journey in order to get help. James felt that the return to work wasn't working. So he did go back to the phones and he did give it a real good go, but it just wasn't working for him. And he asked if he could return to the web chat due to his dyslexia. Now, this might seem a bit of an odd thing, right? Due to his dyslexia. Well, what does that have to do anything? Well, remember, dyslexia isn't just about reading and writing. It can also affect memory, concentration. It can also contribute to stress and workload fatigue. So for James, these elements of his dyslexia was the elements that impacted him the most. But an employer or team leader that doesn't understand dyslexia will always make snap judgments and feel that they understand what it is better than the individual who lives with it on a day-to-day basis. Shelter, his organization, told him that moving back to web chat wasn't going to happen. We've tried it, we've done it. Get back to work, James. You've been off for loads lately. Just do your work. So they weren't willing to make any adjustments to the role Even now, James had a diagnosis of dyslexia, which kind of outlines what he finds difficult, but more importantly, what could help him in order to do his role better. So the organization did not perceive dyslexia affecting his ability to advise over the phone. So they, without any professional opinion or support, decided that they understood dyslexia better than someone who has dyslexia, or via going to a professional, and kind of stuck to their guns and said, no, James, you're staying on the phones. You cannot go back to web chat. Oh, I'm getting stressed just reading all of this. I don't know how this person must have felt. James resigned, unsurprisingly. The company hasn't shown that they care about this person's well-being. And then James brought a claim for disability discrimination against them. He also filed for failure to make reasonable adjustments, also victimization and unfair dismissal. So that's what, 1, 2, 3, 4 separate kind of claims, right? That's quite a lot. And that's what people don't realize. The Equality Act might be one thing, but there's multiple ways. You know, if you aren't looking after this person, you failed them on multiple accounts. Now, just because he brought these claims up doesn't mean that he would have got all of them. So disability discrimination is particularly discriminating against his dyslexia, which he has evidence for, even though he didn't necessarily need it. Failure to make reasonable adjustments. So when he mentioned that he had something which was a protected characteristics, did they do anything? No. Victimization. So was he made to feel bad for being different? Yeah. He felt not listened to. He felt that they kept telling him what he can and cannot do. And unfair dismissal, which is they essentially told him, no, you can't do that role, which was part of his contract. Why? Well, just because they didn't want to make any adjustments. So that would be unfair. So the decision, after it went to court and everything, James's claim was successful on 2 of the accounts, right? And he was awarded £28,000 in compensation. Now, 28 is a good amount. Was it a good amount for James? No, the stress, the anxiety, everything, just, you know, it's not worth that. Most people want a job that's long running. But the consequences this had onto the organization was much more severe. Yes, they lost money, which was giving in donations, which could have helped young homeless people. But more so than that, it impacted their reputation, their trust, the confidence in the organization. It wasn't work. Who was in the right here? You know, because as you could tell by this example, it's not always clear cut. The team leader was just an average person. You know, they were just doing what they felt was right. They were wrong, but who does the responsibility fall on? Does it fall on James to make sure there are adjustments in place and following up that he gets the support he's deserved? Is it the team leader who is responsible for James? Or is it the organization as a whole who does the training and the development for their staff to make sure that they are capable to support a range of people with different understandings? Okay, Chris says, the first manager should have asked HR to do a workplace needs assessment. Absolutely. I think that's great. Like, the thing is, the manager, right? No one's expecting anyone to be absolute experts. How could you possibly be? There's too many things in this world. But you do have to do something, you know, talk to HR. They're experts in finding the information out. Like, for instance, HR could have contacted someone like Exceptional Individuals to get in contact, or another company. You know, you do not have to be experts in everything. You do have to be willing to support someone and find out the adjustments that could work. Let's say James was giving voice recognition software and he could just speak and do the voice chat and the text chat. He could have the better hours, which were better for his well-being and mental health, fit his schedule more, and he would still be of the same quality, but his spelling would be fixed. He could have also had software like Global Autocorrect, which would have automatically corrected his spelling. The solution was there. It was reasonable because it wasn't that expensive, and yet they didn't act on it. So dreadful, but hopefully a word to the wise for organizations when they wonder, is it worth it? James may have not had a diagnosis at the beginning, but had they have acted then, it would have stopped a whole world of pain and effort from both sides. The judge felt that shelter did not make reasonable adjustments. So they had the opportunity to, but they did not. They put all the emphasis on the individual. So James, you've got 4 weeks to do it, 1 week to do it, but they didn't actually do anything to support him with that improvement. James's role included phone work and web chat, denying him the adjustments were not acceptable. So this is quite interesting as well, because obviously if web chat wasn't part of his initial contract, maybe shelter would have had a point, but his contract clearly said that these were both part of his roles. So that was one of the reasons that also leaned into his favor. Okay, that was a lot. Interesting story though, right? But it was a real one. So these things do happen. So the key points is that duty to consider reasonable adjustments exists before a diagnosis is fixed. Really important. You do not have to have a diagnosis in order to have a reasonable adjustment implemented. In fact, you still have to support someone regardless. It doesn't matter. You know, if someone feels they need to get a diagnosis in order to get support, you're not at a good organization. Sorry, but you're not. And that should be an alarm bells for both sides. It is not acceptable to require an employer not to aspect of their role. It is not acceptable to require an employee not to do aspects of their role to avoid making adjustments. Okay, sorry, I worded that bad. But what I mean by this bit is that it's not okay to tell an employee they can't do their job and move them on if you haven't tried to make it easier or better for them. So let's say, you know, with dyslexia, had they so, okay, James, let's try this. Let's get you some coaching or mentoring. Let's get you a buddy system. Let's get you some technology. You know, let's us do some additional training so we understand dyslexia better. That would have been okay. But because they didn't do any of that, it definitely wasn't okay to say, okay, we're just going to move you now, because that wasn't part of his role. He signed up to do both. So quick question back to all of you lovely people. Best ways employers support dyslexic employees. So on here, we've got to have a proofreader. This doesn't have to be a professional person. It could literally be someone next to you who has agreed to spend some of their time just to give your work the once over. Or it could be having instructions verbally. If someone types things to you and you find it difficult to kind of comprehend and to like take meaning from it, having someone to speak to you could be really good. Also, having more time. A lot of organizations are quite time bound and they'll say, okay, you know, this job should take you 10 minutes. Well, could you give someone 15 minutes or 20 minutes if it means they're going to have a higher quality of output? It will save time in the long run. You know, you don't try and cut corners here. We've got unrecorded instructions or meetings. So maybe if someone's at a meeting, that's important, could you record it? Could they use a dictaphone? We've got having a proofreader would be very useful. Same here, like you don't want to feel like a burden, you know, you want to make sure that you can reach out to help and it isn't something which you feel bad about. More time to perform written tasks. I know for myself, that would be essential. Having instructions verbally and recording things. Like obviously this isn't a comprehensive list, but this is just to get people thinking about the type of things. Like all of these, right, do not have to cost the employer anything. They're really easy to put out there. And this would count as a reasonable adjustment. So we've got our RAs are quite cheap. My current and previous ones cost £2,000. More medical reports on dyslexia will suggest reasonable adjustments. Yeah, do you know what they are? Like most adjustments, you're right, cost about £2,000 to implement everything in the training. And if you go via Access to Work, they normally cover like £4,000 of support, mentoring, coaching, whatever, fairly easy. So these, you know, it's not a big expense. 2,000 is nothing for a company compared to the reputation and financial losses that could happen if this escalates. Follow up with verbal messages in an email. Yep. Quick one, what challenges do you think dyslexic employees have? The GIF I just thought is funny, it's not relevant. So what are the standard things that someone with dyslexia might struggle with that a reasonable adjustment could support? This could be a massive list. Maybe you could give us some of your examples. We've got being recognized as being dyslexic. Yeah, some people just don't believe you. If they do not see it, if they see you reading and stuff and writing, they don't believe you. My dyslexia is quite severe, but years and years of support strategies, I have kind of got a grip on it. But if I tell someone I need an adjustment, they'll say, well, you're doing fine already. You know, why do you need to do anything? So it is always worthwhile, like, asking those things. Also, other challenges, typing. Yeah, you might take a bit longer to type. Your brain might miss out a key here or there. Time management, yes. It isn't always about reading and writing. People with dyslexia can struggle with prioritizing, getting like knowing where to work. These are all things that are easily fixed with the right support in place, but if no one supports you, they can be challenging. We've got time, communication, reading, writing, attitudes. Honestly, all of you are spot on here. So case examples of dyslexia discrimination. So let's one more for the before we round up. In 2016, an employment tribunal, Kumlchew v. Starbucks. So we all know Starbucks. Starbucks discriminated against an employee who had dyslexia. Boo. And accused of falsifying documents. That's a big charge. That's a big statement. Falsifying documents. Essentially, you're making it up. You're just like plagiarizing or purposely skewing the numbers. The employee was responsible for taking the temperature of fridges and water and writing down the results. So in Starbucks, you've always got to make temperature and make sure it's at the right temperature, because if not, the food could go bad and poison the customers. You wouldn't want that. So essential part of the role, we can't get around that. The individual made mistakes due to her condition. So due to their dyslexia, they would write down the wrong number, you know, they'd like put the dot in different places. You know, obviously that can't be happening because health and safety is a really crucial thing. But what went wrong here was that her manager removed her from the duties from her and told her to retrain, leaving her feeling suicidal. So basically saying, yeah, you can't do this, go get another job. And that makes people feel awful, and as a result, left her feeling suicidal. Remember, it wasn't the dyslexia that made her feel down. It was the way she was treated by her employer that made her so low. The tribunal found that Starbucks failed to make reasonable adjustments for her disability and had discriminated against. They could have easily done things, you know, you can try, and if you tried everything and it's still not working, then you can say, okay, maybe this isn't the right role for you, but you have to try, and you have to try everything first. So should duties be withheld because they are dyslexic? Yes or no? If you know someone is dyslexic and there is a role which you think they were struggling, do you think that you have the right to say, do not do that? Yeah, the answer is no. They can be reassigned. And you know, you can do that, but it's about, you know, what can you do to support them at the first port of call? Moving them on shouldn't be your number one response. So do not feel that if you've got someone who just genuinely can't do it, that you're stuck with them in that job forever. No. But is there a way of training them up, you know, making sure that you're having that two-way communication? Now, last question, some nice advice from the advice cupcake. If you could give any advice to an employer who manages someone who has dyslexia, what would it be? And I would genuinely love to know this, particularly as some of you are currently going through tribunals or thinking of doing it in the future. If there's something you could tell the employer, like retrospectively, that could have stopped all this mess, what would it have been? Okay, don't make assumptions, ask. Yeah, so often people just think, oh, I know this, I know that. but they don't. Assumptions are what gets people into trouble pretty much all the time. We've got talk to your employees. Yes, have meaningful conversations. Every single person is completely different and individual. We can't make sweeping judgments. Take part in dyslexia/neurodiversity awareness workshops. Yeah, know who to call. Understand your employees' needs and look out for the best ways to support them. All really, really great comments. So my top final tips is all people with dyslexia are different. Dialogue is important to ensure the needs are being met. Once aware, an employer should assume it is under a legal duty to make reasonable adjustments. If in doubt, you are duty bound. Providing training for other staff about dyslexia is also really useful. An open dialogue for employees is crucial. I really like this one about training for other staff because I don't think we should always put the whole emphasis on the person. It can also be an entire company as well. We've got believe them and take directions from them when adjustments. Do they work or not? Apply the code of practice. Yeah. Now, if any of you are currently in the workplace and haven't had adjustments, get in contact. It's literally what we do every day. So Access to Work, which is a workplace needs assessment, is a government scheme which nearly is always free, for you always, but for the employer. And essentially, as long as you have a job and you resonate with having neurodiversity, like dyslexia, dyspraxia, autism, ADHD, get in contact. You can get so much help. And we make it as easy as we possibly can for the employer so they don't have any issues. I always think, the help is there, even because some companies are very small and can't afford these adjustments. But there is help available, and it doesn't have to be negative to the company. Honestly, it's better to get the help early on than wait until someone really, really needs it, because by that point, it's probably too late. Any last questions? Or any last kind of final thoughts before we let you get on with your lovely Thursdays? The training for others never came in my last workplace. That should. If you do have an assessment, say to them, hey, I really think we should have training for my team as well. Because that is something which you can request, which a lot of people do not know. And I think actually should be kind of mandatory for everyone. Now, if you enjoyed today, and I hope you did, our next one is on the stupid dyslexic trope. Now, this might sound really negative. Maybe it needs a bit more explanation. Why do people have such negative views of dyslexia? The media, of course. Who else? We are always seen as dumb, ditzy, forgetful, like not being able to read. And I think understanding how the media represents people like us can definitely help us in understanding why people have these misconceived ideas of what dyslexia is. So this essentially is a bit of a nerdy session when we're going to be going into some like fun, like movies and comics and things like that. It's that we can't change how they are currently, but if we understand where the problem originates from, we might be able to use it for the future. We've got Richard Branston, Keira Knightley, both dyslexic, both successful, absolutely. We've got thanks again for the session. You are very, very welcome. If you did like it, check out our YouTube channel, like and subscribe. Don't forget to ring that little bell. We've got a nice array of webinars now, which we're really proud of. And obviously we couldn't do them without you. So the next one is the dyslexic tropes. Then we've got autism across cultures, ADHD and sex, the clumsy child dyspraxic trope, and a whole heap of others to the end of the year. We also have a Facebook group for dyslexic opportunities for any particular well-suited jobs or roles or just experiences. So feel free to find that online, or you can click that link now. You can also go online and do a characteristics test. Do you think you might have dyslexia? If so, go on our website and find out. It's not a medical diagnosis, but it can be used as a starting point for a conversation. You could say to your employer, I think I have dyslexia. I did this report and it showed signs that I was more likely than others. Could this be something we could make adjustments for? Because you don't want to have to get an official diagnosis all the time because they're really, really expensive. So this is a very cheap starting point to get a conversation going. Anyway, thank you all again. Here's the details to get in contact. I hope you found it useful. And honestly, I really appreciate how engaged this group was. It's been really great to have you. So thank you very, very much. Nice. Bye, everyone. Hopefully catch you at the next one.